if I'm primarily shooting closer and want to have the capability for those, PHID or PID things or target discernment at range, then, if I'm biased towards that closer end of employment, then the red dot is where that comes into its own. Because even, no matter how forgiving the eye box is on a low powered variable optic, a red dot still is more forgiving. So, I mean, you can do all kind of crazy things. And as long as you see a dot through, you can be 8 inches off axis and in some situations and still get an aiming solution with a red dot where you don't quite have that much leeway. So I like red dots for things in close.
Duane, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Hey, we have something in common, even though I don't think we've met, but you're the executive vice president of Magpul Industries, and I'm a huge fan of Magpul Industries. So I want to talk to you about that. But first, I want to talk about sort of your background and what got you started with firearms. I know that you started shooting pretty early, right?
Absolutely. My first birthday present was a rifle, a Glenfield Model 25N22, and started shooting at about 4. Took to it very quickly, and it became a passion for me. By the time I was 12, I was starting to learn how to refinish stocks and do some basic gunsmithing stuff. I had my first job as a gunsmith at 17, and was basic gunsmithing stuff, fixing things, as well as kind of building some competition pistols, mounting optics, things like that, all the way back in 1990. When the optics thing first started on handguns with frame-mounted optics, back with some of the early Aimpoints, as well as some of the other Tascos and things like that way back in the Stone Age.
Wow, that's impressive. So initially, when you started messing with armorer type stuff, I should say, were you kind of self-taught, or did you have someone that sort of mentored you to becoming a gunsmith at such an early age?
Learned a lot from my father on the basics and just understanding tools and metalworking, as well as some woodworking things, and did a lot of self-study as well. The Brownells Gunsmith Kinks books and things like that, all the way back then as well. And then just continually some experimenting, some self-study, and then working with some folks that were gunsmiths that I worked with or knew from the competitive world, and just picking stuff up along the way.
And then what motivated you to join the Marine Corps?
I had always, from a very young age, I had wanted to be a Marine. It just seemed like what I was supposed to do. And so got it in my head and never let go of it. Had some difficulties in getting in, thanks to a car accident at age 16 that put some retained orthopedic hardware into my body. But eventually did break down those barriers and get wavered and get in.
Very cool. And then what was that like? I mean, obviously you loved firearms, you loved shooting, you loved training and that part of it. But what was it like when you joined the Marine Corps?
So certainly institutional application of riflecraft is its own beast, right? And learned a lot about kind of soldier's load and some of the different considerations that certainly hadn't been a factor in the competitive world or hunting or recreational shooting. And so early exposure, and it was my first exposure as well to the frustrations of magazine issues back in 1999, with some of the issued magazines actually being golden color because the anodization had worn off and probably had been around since the Vietnam era in some cases. So always the frustrations of magazines not working correctly and being the weak link in the system, certainly.
And talk a little bit about your experience as a competitive shooter. We sort of skipped over that.
Yeah, so started USPSA, I want to say around 15, late 15 or 16 years old. And just I started training for it and looking at some things and trying to get involved. And then by the time I was late 16 and full 17, I was straight up at it. As I was when I was working in that gunsmithing job, I was sponsored by the range I worked at and shot a lot of USPSA at that point. And that was my first exposure. Shot some 3-gun back then as well, but that was certainly the Stone Age of 3-gun with the whole arm sleeves with 12 gauge shells and all that stuff. But so those were my first exposures there. Did some after that, Marine Corps, and during the Marine Corps time, I did some additional USPSA whenever I had some chances to do that. got into some precision stuff back before PRS and all that stuff. When up at Wit Center, they had the precision rifle matches on the backside there. Did some of those things and got more heavily into 3-gun or multi-gun as well during those times.
Yeah, that's quite an impressive resume. Let's talk a little bit too about something pretty significant that we sort of glossed over or didn't address, is that you were a fighter pilot.
Indeed, indeed. So yeah, I had a very crazy career path. I'd always wanted to be an enlisted infantryman and a sniper, right? That was really what my end goal was, is to be a Marine Corps sniper, which did not come to fruition. I ended up as an enlisted infantryman, and it was 24. I was 24 by the time I got in. It was post college, and on Paris Island, my series commander had me in his office like almost every day trying to get me to put in an officer package. And I did put in an officer package on Paris Island, and I got selected. So went off, did the OCS thing, did the TBS thing. And then when it came time for MLS selection, it's, I had never had any interest in flying or anything like that. It's not a lifelong dream to be a pilot or anything like that. But during those times, it was 1999, 2000, those time frames. Didn't seem to be a lot going on the ground. I had the company commander in my TBS class was an F-18 driver, and we had some conversations, and I had passed the AFQT to be qualified to be a pilot. And so I thought, well, that may be the best way to kind of get into, um, the heat of things. And the other thing I liked about that career path is that you were a warfighter. As an officer, you were a warfighter the whole way up through being a lieutenant colonel. And so you kind of got to stay with it. Whereas on other career paths, there was platoon commander time, and then staff time, and then company commander time, and then back into staff time, and less of the continuity in being the actual warfighter. And so in the officer field, I gave it a shot and decided wanted to be an F-18 pilot, and that's where I ended up.
That's fascinating because, you mentioned that you weren't really, it wasn't a lifelong goal to be a pilot, but there's a lot of people who it is their lifelong goal to be a pilot, and they don't have that opportunity that you seized. And that's pretty neat. How would you explain, piloting, an aircraft like you piloted to someone who's never experienced anything like that? I mean, what's it like? Like your first time you were up in one of those things, what were you thinking?
The first time is absolutely terrifying. It's like you now have the controls of a $40 million machine with 36,000 pounds of thrust behind you, and it's not. I mean, it's not terrifying. You work your way up and the whole thing, but it's like it's exhilarating for sure, and there's a lot going on. The way I describe tactical aviation to people is it's like driving a sports car on a challenging road course while playing a video game and having a phone conversation at the same time.
Jeez. Yeah, a little multitasking going on, I could imagine.
For sure.
Wow, very impressive. So I wonder how all of your sort of varied experiences contribute to your philosophy about firearms, what you look for in a firearm.
So having come from a background of gunsmithing and understanding kind of systems and the way mechanical things work, specifically in firearms, among other things, is helpful in understanding operating systems, certainly. So all that, the years of fixing things that other people messed up or just neglected or configured wrong, those things help kind of guide my understanding of what needed to be certain ways, and our appreciation for correctly configured firearms and maintenance and things like that. The ground side, even the early days on the infantry side, gave an appreciation for kind of ergonomics, like back in the frustrations of dealing with slings, where we had the GI slings with various pieces of paracord and duct tape to make functional patrol slings in 1999 because it just didn't exist. And then the kind of the evolution through single point and 2-point and some of the 3-point S&M contraptions that were around for a hot minute, but understanding the applications there, the soldier's load, access to things, as well as the challenges of kind of employing a firearm in operational environments. So the MARSOC time, certainly, with that. So it's the first time I'd, fired shots in anger was the MARSOC deployments. But there's different challenges that I learned to appreciate, even as a fact. Like I'm not, commando Johnny operator. The My MARSOT time was a forward air controller. Certainly got in some scrapes, and but there's far better operators around me that I learned a lot from as well. But that kind of stuff, all those things formulated my opinions about what to appreciate about sighting systems, reliability, um, night and day applications, ergonomics, and kind of the employment considerations around fundamentals of marksmanship and shooting positions as well.
Duane, as if you hadn't had enough things to do, you're also very involved with advocacy for, especially like AR-15 platform firearms. And also, you are a board member. Are you a current board member with the NRA?
I was a board member 2018 through late 2020 during some of the troubles, right? And try and fix some things and get some things sorted out. I ended up leaving the board position just due to, I mean, they were doing some things that weren't even notifying the board, like the fake bankruptcy deal, some of the other crazy stuff that happened. I've still stayed in touch with a lot of those folks and helping to kind of right the ship. I served on the nominating committee this past time to get a slate of candidates in there that can adjust the balance of power, as it were, and that's been successful. There's really good officers right now, and Doug's doing a great job. Certainly now that he's empowered with a board that is completely on his side, and I expect great things from the organization. At some point, I may go back to, board service, but I've been certainly, trying to help that organization as well as others in the time. We support SAF and, some of the FPC stuff and certainly ASA and some of the things they did, very instrumental in trying to get this, suppressor and SBR delisting, which ended up being kind of a detaxification, which also opens up the legal challenge. But yes, I'm very active in that side of just trying to. I'm a big libertarian when it comes to Second Amendment rights. I think it's, you should be able to have mail order suppressed belt-fed machine guns with short barrels.
Agreed. I grew up in California and was a cop there for 26 years, and the gun laws there are just so insane. Like I'd be in the office and they would say, Sergeant Nance, you have a call on line E, someone from Texas moving to California, and they want to know about the gun laws. And I'm like,
so at that point, you're the guy with the rings on the board behind trying to explain how it all.
Hey, just leave them there, But now I live in Arizona, so I get to mess with cool things like suppressors and all that stuff. But you were talking about sort of some dated technology and stuff. When in 2003, when I got on our SWAT team, we were using like Vietnam era AR-15s, and iron sights and all that stuff. And there wasn't a lot of adaptability, and there was even with pistols at the time, it was like we were issuing at that time, I believe, the Glock 21, which is a fairly large handgun, and you had an officer with small hands. Well, figure it out. I mean, that was the solution to everything back then was, you have to fit the shooter to the gun. Well, now, obviously that's not the case. And we're very fortunate in that sense. Of all the things you guys have done and innovated at Magpul Industries, what are you most proud of?
That's probably two-pronged. One certainly is the PMAG, and specifically the Gen M3 PMAG. If you were around for the IC carbine competitions and all that stuff back in the early 2000s and trying to solve the woes of the M4 and M16 platforms with reliability issues, and the reality of the situation is it just needed a better magazine. We've been able to hit numbers on a standard M4, even with kind of EPR ammunition, of 31,854 rounds between stoppages that are magazine related. And then, in the UK MOD Hunter program, that Knights rifle went 100,000 rounds of more conventional ammo without a single stoppage to any cause, which is kind of crazy these days. And adverse conditions and things like that, being able to have magazines that work in the sand and the grit and the dirt and the dust and all those things, I think it's kind of changed the nature of what we expect from a DI system.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you, brother. Those Vietnam era magazines, those GI style magazines, were a lot of the reasons that the AR earned sort of a reputation as not being reliable, right? I think maybe at the time people assumed it was the actual firearm, but I think nowadays most of us realize that it was probably magazine related stuff. And I
Yeah.
remember when we first started going to PMags and you could actually load your mag with 30 rounds. You know what I mean? That was kind of cool because before it was like load it to 30 and download 2 and all that stuff. So yeah, no, that was pretty revolutionary. You guys have done so much as far as, furniture and everything to really make what we were talking about earlier, to make a firearm your own, to make it fit your specific needs. And I think that that's one of the huge reasons, not solely Magpul, but certainly they had a lot to do with the popularity of the AR-15 and the reason why people keep choosing that, because they can, not only can they outfit it to meet their specific needs, but they can tailor it to, like in a law enforcement capacity, there could be one rifle that multiple officers can use and they could sort of, adjust the stock and all that stuff to make it more comfortable for them. So yeah, it really is an easy firearm to shoot effectively. And Magpul is kind of on the forefront of just making that even easier. Certainly the gold standard as far as all that stuff goes. How long have you been with Magpul?
13 years and change at
Oh,
this.
wow. So yeah, you've seen a lot of that and been very involved in a lot, not just seen it, but been very involved in a lot of those things that have been game changers for the industry. So
A lot of sleepless.
very awesome. What's that?
A lot of sleepless nights.
Oh, I bet. So, talking a little bit about a setup, like if you had one rifle and you wanted to have kind of an all-purpose rifle setup, maybe you could use it for personal home defense, hunting, that sort of thing. What types of thing would you look for specifically?
So, okay, one rifle to do it all. So the heart of any AR is going to be barrel, bolt carrier, and buffer systems. Some people leave out that back end, and it's not which buffer, but a correctly buffered for the gas port, the ammunition, and the whole deal, and suppressor configurations and all that stuff. But those three things kind of form the heart of any AR system, and depending on what you want to do with it. 12.5 is an awesome barrel length to be do-all if you have anything that requires compactness. Otherwise, 14.5, 16, will do you for a kind of a general rifle. If you're not worried about getting in and out of vehicles or CQB type activities, but if those are involved, 12.5 still is a great compromise, and that you get enough velocity to be very, very usable at kind of not super extended distances. It's not the forte of 5.56 in general, but certainly at any reasonable expected employment range. So 12.5 I like. Rigid rail. There's a bunch of good rails out there, but rigidity is important. Certainly a negative space attachment system, M-LOK. It's another thing we're very proud of.
A little better than the quad rail. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly saves a little bit of weight as well as wear and tear on your gloves/hands. So M-LOK rail of some sort with the rigidity appropriate to the application. So certainly in anything you're going to put a bipod on, the rigidity demands are higher than something that you intend to be shooting offhand with a short rail and things like that at shorter distances. But still, laser deflection and things like that, rail mounted accessories, that's a very real thing to consider. A trigger you can shoot. So LaRue triggers, whether it's a LaRue or a Geisley or whatever your trigger of choice is, obviously, and if it's a dual rifle, certainly reliability and durability becomes a factor there. And then sighting system is probably one of the most critical elements in how you employ that rifle these days. And optics have totally changed the game with both rifles and handguns since the days of the M16A2 and the irons. Not that you can't do great things shooting in an easel at 500 meters with iron sights, but man, it's a lot easier to do PID, target identification, small partial targets, things like that. Saving the time of shifting focus with single focal plane from an optic where you're doing PID and then shifting to a sighting solution where you have to shift focus on irons and things like that are no longer an issue. The optics certainly, and various pros and cons for different sighting systems for the given application.
iron sights were pretty cool when I had younger eyes, but now not so much. I mean, I can shoot minute of exactly all the time with that, brother. Same. I could shoot minute a bad guy, with a pistol with iron sights. But as far as I do a lot of gun reviews, so trying to shoot for accuracy, like braced off a bench, it's like I virtually have to have an optic in order to shoot respectable groups. So yeah, there's a lot going on there. What do you think? What's your take on like a red dot sight versus a magnified optic, maybe a low power variable scope?
So different applications to some extent, right?
And of course with the magnifier for the red dot as well,
Yeah, so that adds a lot of versatility to the system. The ability to kind of rotate smoothly two magnifications on the low power variable, as well as having a generous eye box on appropriate examples of that, work very well for a lot of do-it-all carbines, especially if there's some longer ranges involved, or if there's some tasks requiring specific target identification or partial target identification, small target identification, things like that. I like low power variables a lot for some of those things. If I'm primarily shooting closer and want to have the capability for those, PHID or PID things or target discernment at range, then, if I'm biased towards that closer end of employment, then the red dot is where that comes into its own, because even, no matter how forgiving the eye box is on a low powered variable optic, a red dot still is more forgiving. So, I mean, you can do all kind of crazy things. And as long as you see a dot through, you can be 8 inches off axis in some situations and still see, get an aiming solution with a red dot where you don't quite have that much leeway. So I like red dots for things in close. And in close means, inside, 200 meters, certainly. And, inside 100, it's absolutely where it's going to shine.
Yeah, very, very well stated. What, in your opinion, would separate, say, a good AR-15 build from a great AR-15 build?
One, a coherent thought. So there's not putting things on that don't add to what you're trying to achieve.
That was the way to go for several years. It's like as much stuff as we can hang on there. Let's
Kitchen sink
have
build.
one of everything and a backup, So yeah, I remember those days.
Yeah, absolutely. And so figuring out what the application of that gun is, and then, building to that without ending up, I mean, you can build a 13-pound, 10-inch gun. It's not that hard. It's not advisable for what the tasks of a 10-inch gun are usually going to be, but you just got to watch that you don't get carried away. And so a unified thought on what you're trying to put together. And then the heart of that system, once again, just having a solid, whether it's a gun from a reputable manufacturer, Sons, or, any of the other factory guns, or a Hodge gun, or, there's tons of good guns by, Colt and DD and things like that. And I mean, the list is pretty comprehensive at this point of good guns out there, or base platforms to start with, or, you start with a solid barrel, solid bolt carrier and buffer it appropriately, and then build from there. And then really, are you wearing armor? Are you not wearing armor? What are your considerations for how you're going to shoot that rifle? I'm a big fan of our DT stocks right now. I'm kind of switching over my whole fleet to the DT or the DTPR for those applications where there might be some distance involved. But and ergonomics for how it interacts with your shoulder. There's a whole bunch of things on just butt pad angle that we play with and with various toe to heel lengths that optimize butt pad angle changes. There's a sweet spot in butt pad angle for various sizes of person and application where you actually get straighter to the rear recoil as that butt pad angle changes, and it's different for different heel to toe lengths and where it contacts the body. So there's all kind of little things like that.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Duane, because that's something that you'll shoulder that AR and you'll be like, wow, that feels really good. Or you'll shoot it and you may not be able to articulate exactly why, but it's kind of like, that's the secret sauce, I guess, that you guys are putting into it. That's really, really meaningful to the end user.
We put a lot of thought into those things that may not be immediately obvious. I mean, it's one thing to design a stock that looks good and has visual appeal, but then when you try to configure it for the applications that it's going to see, working with kind of the what the user is wearing, how they're employing it, and then also making sure that you meet durability standards and requirements, which we're kind of over the top on that one. Is like pretty much everything that comes out the door passes the 32045 rough handling drop tests, and negative 60 to positive 180, and so it's fairly abusive on a lot of stock systems. So
Wayne, you've mentioned a couple times, and I wholeheartedly agree, although your knowledge is far more vast than mine with regard to AR-15s, but it's the bolt carrier group that's kind of the heart of that system. I went to a 3-day armorer course, Colt armorer course, and I learned to take it completely apart, put it back together, but I still didn't have a real thorough knowledge, and this is more my fault than the instructor's fault, about how that gun functioned. But one of the things, and I learned that later on, but you can't learn everything in a 3-day course, I guess. But sure. One of the things that I was told that always sticks with me is, he said, don't worry about the barrel, it's chrome lined, don't worry about this and that. He goes, just make sure that the bolt carrier group is wet, and we're like, well, how wet? He goes, dunk it in like Mobil 1 motor oil, shake it off 3 times and put it in there. And it's funny trying to get that across to the officers once we switch from shotguns to patrol rifles, is that this needs to be wet.
Mm-hmm.
Our Glocks, no. You know what I mean? It's like Glocks run dry, ARs run wet. So that was, I think some of the instructors transversed that, and we're teaching exactly the opposite of that. But anyway, we eventually got it all figured out. But, equipment has a lot to do with performance for sure. And especially in a defensive firearm or even a competitive firearm, you want to have something that's not going to hinder your ability. You want something that's going to make it easier to shoot well. But what's your take on, do you think some people are so focused on gear that they sort of neglect the training component?
Yeah, that's a trend that's been around as long as firearms have been. There's always a tendency to the proverbial look for hardware solutions to software problems, because it seems easier or faster. And don't get me wrong, there are certainly hardware things that will help you advance in your capabilities. And one of the things that I took from aviation into the firearms field and the ground side is that the capabilities of your system can certainly affect how well you can implement tactics, if not the tactics themselves. So the equipment advantages are absolutely very real, but if you try to skip the hard part, which is fundamentals of marksmanship and shooting capability, and the time you need to put in, there's no shortcut to that stuff, and you can't fix it with equipment. Things like the Maztec X4 FCS, you can certainly cheat the code on learning ballistic calculations and things like that.
Thank God.
But on the fundamentals of shooting and positional stuff, and so some of the biggest things that I think get ignored, positional shooting. There's a lot of emphasis that I think people put on CQB distances and running 10 thou splits into a target that isn't moving or reacting. And that can be, from a standing position, and that certainly those skills are 100% applicable. But depending on what you're doing with a firearm, some of the positional stuff becomes very, very important, especially when you're into compromised positions. You're wearing a bunch of gear and things like that. And as the wake up call for positional stability is when you start shooting, a 308 gasser, right? Where the recoil is more, that during dwell time, the rifle moves more. And now it's like, well, my zero's jacked. I'm like, nah, man, your position just isn't stable. Some of the things also that I think fundamentally folks don't understand is, and Latham has been on this for a lot of years, and it's something that I picked up, or certainly I picked up on earlier, is the fundamentals of shooting and what exactly you need to do and be focusing on. People say, well, you just need to execute whatever you need to do to shoot accurately, in a compressed timeline and do it faster. And it's like, well, the reality is things change when you're trying to shoot faster, or take shots of opportunity that, may be presented in a small window. So compressing those fundamentals, there are some differences in how you're going to do things, and understanding those things and when to apply them. Those are things I think that get ignored or glossed over, and a lot of things like, oh, this is it. This is how your fundamentals of marksmanship work. And the bottom line is, it's, an initiation and completion of the firing sequence without unacceptably disturbing your sight alignment sight picture. And that's what it comes down to. But that's a pretty big, difference in what happens at 7 yards or 25 yards and the size of your target and what needs to happen at 1, 2, 500 meters. And so it's this weird, kind of rheostat on precision versus the compressed application of fundamentals that needs to occur, and what is an acceptable, kind of distortion of the sight alignment sight picture.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I think most of us shoot a target that's, facing frontal to us at 7 yards, 10 yards, or whatever. I'm talking about a pistol right now.
Yep.
And you think that, you could do a bill drill and burn it down, and you think that you understand the balance of speed and precision. Well, for that particular application, you may have a handle on that. But now what happens when it's twice as far, or when you're dealing with a suspect who is using cover, and now your target, instead of being a full, a torso, is now just the guy's head and maybe his arm and gun sticking out, or worse yet, if he has a hostage, so all those situations, your speed, you have to know how fast you can shoot in all of those types of situations. And that's done through drills. Drills are one way, time drills, but also doing some, force on force type stuff with, back in the day, it was more simunition, and now it seems like it's more airsoft, which is a kind of a practical way to do that. But what you can do on your best day, when you're sitting there by yourself and you do it 14 times, right, and you finally achieve this sub 1 second draw or this clean bill drill, that's not your skill on demand. That's something that you can do some of the time. But we need to be concerned, I think, with what we can do most of the time. But very good answer. And also, you mentioned Rob Latham. I've filmed with him a couple times, and he's an absolute freak of nature. I mean, the things that he does are like, you can have all the same equipment as him, and you could practice every day, all day, and people have a hard time. And I've said this before on the podcast, but it's true. People, for some reason in the shooting sports, they think that skill is not a huge factor. No one assumes that with a little practice, they could become a Major League Baseball pitcher, right? But people think that, like, if I had just this right gear, a little bit of practice, I could be competitive like Rob Latham. No, you can't. You know what I mean? But it's interesting. But he has some very interesting thoughts too on trigger control, which there's no way I could argue with him about it because the proof is in the results. But some of the stuff, like I think if I try to teach, our officers to shoot, to manipulate the trigger the way he does, I think they'd be putting rounds in the ground 10 feet before the target.
He beats a trigger like it owes him money. And it's still, but the bottom line is, and what, things that he says, it's, are you disturbing the sight picture unacceptably? And if you're not, then your trigger control is fine. Whatever you're doing with that trigger, if you're not moving the firearm to unacceptably disturb your sight picture and you're getting your firing sequence, then your trigger control suits that application. But being able to turn that off and turn that on and adjust it on that rheostat of what the required precision is based on the target size and distance, that's the Rolodex that he's built in his mind over millions of rounds that you can't.
It's on autopilot. He's on autopilot now. Yeah.
You can't download that from a memory stick and just put that into your head. You just have to build your own Rolodex.
Well, I was pretty confident I knew what he was suggesting as far as manipulating the trigger, but I had to ask him just to make sure. And if I remember it correctly, he's like, you come off the trigger fast all the time and you press the trigger at whatever speed you can and still ensure you're hit. But again, you can understand that theoretically, but applying that practically, that is what makes Rob Latham.
Yeah, that's the challenge. And, we just talk riding reset on precision, shooting with a handgun and things like that. And it certainly helps reinforce follow through for slower and more accurate requirements of shots. And so in that sense, that kind of thing is there, but coming off the trigger like it's hot.
Yeah. Because the tendency is that then slap the trigger, which Rob doesn't do clearly. You know what I mean? Or if he does it in some magical way that still results in hits on target. But
Yeah,
yeah, the fear. And I was taught, as a matter of fact, I just wrote a column about this for Handguns magazine, but I was taught, and I think this is what you're referring to as well, like kind of like pull and pin, like you would press the trigger and let recoil come up and come back down on the target. Now your sights are on target. Now you're resetting the trigger.
that's
A
yeah.
good friend of mine, and that may be okay for the initial stages of learning to shoot, but that's certainly not going to do any favors in a gunfight. You don't need your gun to be ready, but your trigger's not reset. In other words, your sights are on target, but you're not in a position to fire. So Dave Spalding teaches what he calls reset and recovery. And it's kind of a 3-step process. He teaches first use one hand and just fire around and let recoil do its thing. Don't resist it. And
Mm-hmm.
then reset that trigger. You get used to having some time to reset the trigger so that when the sights are back down on the target, you're ready to fire. Then he has it, okay, now grip harder, bear into it, but still just with one hand. And then you have a little bit less time. And finally, you add your second hand. And then by this time, you're starting to understand that cadence. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, you have to adjust that based on distance, proximity of a threat, the degree of accuracy required and all that. But that is how you learn to shoot, I think, as fast as your gun will allow. So it's very interesting stuff. But
Absolutely.
what you're on the forefront of all these improvements, if you will, in the firearms industry. Is there anything right now, any like emerging trends that you're excited about, or anything that you look at and you're just like, ugh, I wish this trend would die?
So one of the things that I have always lamented for a long time, going all the way back to like the early days of 6.5 Grendel and 6.8 SPC, is trying to fit, a 10-pound cartridge into a 5-pound bag, as it were. So things that are too big into a magazine well where it doesn't fit and you can't get a proper round stack and things like that. And that applies to 6 ARC and a regular 5.56 platform as well. And that doesn't even talk about we have to shoot lower pressures in a conventional AR system because of kind of the bolt face being as small as it is, and then bolt lug kind of fracturing even at the 50 to 55,000 PSI, rather than go to 60 to 65, where normal cartridges live for the most part. And so I'm squeezing things into, if it's bigger, make it bigger. And kind of the intermediate platform with the Surefire ICAR that was just adopted as the unit rifle in 6 ARC. I'm excited about that. And then it gives us a whole new kind of platform size. And there's a bunch of manufacturers that have grabbed that magazine and are starting to adapt things for both 6 ARC and 338 ARC that I think are going to be interesting, as well as some of the possibilities for different cartridges and modifications or wildcats of those existing frames that are going to end up just opening up a whole new realm of possibilities.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff. When it comes to optics, you were kind of involved very early on. Maybe you could talk about how optics have improved from when you first started messing with them. And we could talk about rifle or pistol optics
Mm-hmm.
and where they are today. I mean, it's night and day improvement, I know, but I'd be curious to get kind of your take on it, having experienced that firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. So optics for me, both rifle and handgun. So with like the low power variable changed a lot of things because it was before a choice in magnification, or God forbid the LCAN in the switch lever kind of 1 to 4 deal. But the red dot itself in handguns and rifles in general, originally seen as kind of gamer gear. And that's where a lot of things go until we sort out durability and battery life and all those things. And we certainly couldn't slide mount an optic back in the days due to weight, size, and the ability of the optic to take recoil. But like understanding that the benefits of that single focal plane and things like that, there's a 44 Magnum Super Blackhawk hanging on the center of the wall in my gun vault that I put together for my father back in 1990 with an optic on it to use for hunting. And like the benefits were there back then, and a lot of things just needed to kind of catch up for general application, durability, and battery life and things like that. But now, like even back in 2010, when I first started messing with slide mounted optics and open emitters, there's some drawbacks, and certainly environmental factors could mess up your sighting system on your handgun. And, you had whether the dot was there or not was
Yeah.
sometimes a roll of the dice.
And that was
And
kind of an electronics thing back then, right? I mean,
yeah,
they just hadn't mastered that part of it.
yeah, for sure. And we even had that in rifle optics when we started some of the systems we were using in MARSOC for the 10.5 inch guns. The you know durability of systems, dealing with battery life issues and things like that were challenging in those applications, and they've just continued to develop into a point where it's I think to some time backup sites are less of a requirement now, certainly, than they were, just due to failure rates and battery life and things like that, and the durability of the system. I'm still a fan, just because I don't know, I'm a belt and suspenders kind of guy. But the bottom line is now we have clarity, we have dot resolution, and we have the ability to adjust magnification in a way with a generous eye box where you're not limiting yourself when it comes to red dot systems with magnifiers or without. And then low power variable stuff also just really opened up the game as far as truly versatile systems that bias towards precision and PID, but able to roll back down, maybe not getting pretty close to what red dot performance is, but you're not being as forgiving of some of those awkward positions and crazy kind of eye
Yeah.
box requirements.
Back in the early 2000s, we had our SWAT team had optics on our rifles. The patrol officers did not, but those optics were sure they made shooting easier, but they virtually every time we grabbed the rifle, we'd have a battery issue. It was an Aimpoint.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not going to mention what it was, but it
yeah.
was. They worked really well, but just their durability. Well, the housing and everything was plenty durable, but the electronics and everything, it was very frustrating that you'd power up your rifle, power up your optic rather, and no dot. You open it up and it's all the batteries look like they're you know
They've
corroded
shorted and
and
got the zinc,
very
mushrooms
frustrating.
growing around.
But they've come a long way. A lot of people. I was a pretty early adopter too of red dots on pistols. Not as early as you, but I immediately saw the benefit of having that intuitive aiming system instead of under duress having to align sights and change your focus from the threat, which is, let's face it, that's where your focus is going to tend to be.
Yeah.
Physiologically, it's going to be hard to break that, to come back to your sights. Now, can people do it? Yes, I believe people
Sure.
can do it. I believe people have done it, but it's much more difficult than just having, like you mentioned, one focal plane and just overlaying that dot. To me, it's very simple, but everybody's always like, well, the battery can die. This can happen. That's true. But I've been at the range several times when someone draws their pistol and there goes their front sight. So, and I think these days that's less of an excuse not to transition to a red dot, because they are so durable. Most Aimpoint, there's a few other brands too. They're very, very durable. And also the battery life is crazy. Like Aimpoint Koa, I think it's a 50,000 hour battery life. That's nuts. You know what I mean? So yeah, change it once a year on your birthday or whatever, and you're probably going to be good to go. But that being said, like you, I do like to have backup iron sights. And I certainly think that even if you're a red dot shooter, like if I were going to teach a new shooter right now how to shoot, I'd want them to understand how to shoot iron sights as well, because their dot could go out, or it's just a good skill to have. It's like driving a manual transmission car. They say that's what is it? Millennial anti-theft device is to have a manual transmission. But no, all good stuff there. And you're right. The dot on a lot of these, it's just very bright. And I like it now to where the Koa, for instance, the window that you're looking through is the same size as the acro, which is crazy because it's such a smaller optic. But, I think we've realized that we can have durable optics without having a 1/2 inch thick housing around them that makes the window tiny.
That's extremely important on a pistol optic to me, as well as a rifle optic. With depending on where you place it, is does my tendency or my binocular vision allow that thing to kind of ghost out? And if we can get to that where it's not interfering with things that you can see in the target area, it becomes less of a distraction. It also helps with presentation and alignment from our perspective. And as well as on a handgun, I always have backup irons or irons on a handgun for the exact purpose of under stress, under duress, weird positions, hands wet, whatever. Yes, on a proper presentation after a bunch of draw strokes, the dot's just there, right? But when you get something wonky and the dot's not there, if you kind of look for the irons and allow your subconscious to align that slide to put those irons in anywhere close to a sighting solution, the dot's there then.
I think you're making a great point there, Duane. And a lot of people I've heard, and I don't agree with this at all, but people say, use your irons to find the dot. Well, if you do that, you are going to be slower. There's no way you could not be slower because you're doing 2 steps instead of 1. You're better off just with irons. I don't even think you should do that in the initial stages of transitioning from irons to a red dot on a pistol, because it's not what you want to do. You want to start looking for that dot. And a lot of that, as you know, has to do with presentation, that consistency with presentation. And, if you hand someone a pistol with a dot, they'll bring it up to the target and they'll probably do one of these things, but it's not way over there. It's not way over there. It's like you said, just, okay, get a frame of reference, either your sights or the slide or something to just, orient to the general direction of the target. And then you'll probably find the dot. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's absolutely advantageous, but there is going to be a little bit of a learning curve. And I think that the more skilled you are, the more time you have on those iron sights, the more challenging it's going to be to not look at the dot as a front sight, but rather to just focus on the target, which is what we want to do with a red dot on a pistol. So
Absolutely a learning curve for sure. And it's, after umpteen gazillion repetitions with irons and transitioning that focus and things like that, the freedom to stay target focused is liberating, but it takes a little bit of time to free yourself from those chains.
It does. And then, like everything we're talking about, your shooting cadence varying depending on distance or size of the threat. How you use a red dot, I think, also can change based on those factors. I was talking to a professional shooter and I thought I knew what I was talking about. And I said, well, you don't want to use the dot as a front sight. And he's like, well, at what distance? Because at a certain distance, you do start using the front. I don't know if I'd say using it, but you have to start concentrating more on the dot. You can't just focus solely on the target at distance with a pistol. So, it's all this stuff.
There's dot size, right? So dot size and the clarity of the edge of the dot, and you start using the edge of the dot where you need to kind of look at the dot based on where things are at, because you're trying to place a more precise shot, and the dot's 3.5 MOA or more. You end up starting.
What's your take on that? What do you think is a good compromise, like a good dot size? I've even used that Ruger Ready dot, which is I believe it's a 15 MOA dot.
The dinner plate dot.
For certain people in certain situations, that has some validity, I think. But I think for most applications, you want something much smaller than that. What's your take on like a good dot size for a pistol?
I've always liked small dots, so I'm down towards the 3.5 size dot. We're in that general vicinity. I just like small dots, and as long as the intensity of either the auto system or what I leave it on, it allows brightness to be there. There's no fishing for it, and so I don't feel like I'm losing anything by having a smaller dot.
Are you a fan of the auto adjust, or would you prefer to be able to adjust the brightness?
I will say I want the capability to do both sometimes. And various, if you have it, keep it jacked up to work in bright sunlight, and then you need to use it, in dim light, you can end up with a bunch of blooming and some things that are undesirable. But there are some auto systems that are better than others. And so I go back and forth depending on what optic I'm running, how I run those systems, and I run a bunch just to kind of stay abreast of what's going on, and not be a dinosaur.
Do you think there's something to be said for the kind of commonality of aiming, if you will, between like having a red dot on your AR and having a red dot on your pistol?
Yeah, I mean, the having to switch between the, kind of single focal plane element with a rifle optic, and then now I'm in an iron sight frame of mind on a handgun. Even in some of the force on force stuff that, I've played with, and it's anecdotal. Maybe it's not the same for everybody, and, it's not like I've done thousands of hours of force on force, but I've done a decent amount of it. The watching for cues that trip the line of where lethal force is justified or required, and then that split second of transitioning to front sight focus, depending on distance, and you can get away with ghosting the front sights and not necessarily switching, whatever. But that little interplay there, and the ability, if the situation changes once you've transitioned to that focus, and I mean, it's a messy area for me, where I really enjoy having that single focal plane advantage for that reason, if nothing else. Your target potentially changing shape, moving, that thing's turning, which would change your perception of required aim point and desired bullet path. All that stuff's happening while you're theoretically getting a blurry target and focusing on a front sight with irons. Whereas single focal plane, same as with rifle, put the dot where it needs to be, and you're absolutely in tune with the exact situation as it is occurring, and there's no time lag. Even if it's nanoseconds or microseconds or whatever it is, fractions of a second, it's still there.
Yeah. And even with a red dot, and I'm an advocate of having backup iron sights, as I mentioned, but I'm so used these days to the red dot working that if I'm firing and something happens and the red dot goes out, I'm trying to work through this, but the tendency is to not immediately transition to the iron sights, but to think, whoa, my dots, so you're going to have to practice that, and if you want to be able to seamlessly transition to iron sights in the event that your dot does go out, you're going to need to be able to practice that. So I want to talk about your experience with Aimpoint. Obviously, Aimpoint invented the red dot sight 50 years ago. This is their 50th anniversary, and a very, very trusted brand with law enforcement and military. But I wonder your personal experiences with Aimpoint products over the years.
So the very earliest exposure was when I switched to open, back in, oh gosh, 1990, 91 time frame. And the first 30 millimeter tube Aimpoint was, I splurged and basically wanted a high school guy debt, to put one of those on a 9x21 CZ75. That was my open gun. And back when we were running, 180 major and running like 65, 70,000 PSI to get there in a 9x21.
And were
Uh,
you just noticing, I mean, were you amazed at how much easier that was? Or was it, like we mentioned before, a big learning curve for you?
there was a learning curve, but certainly with a frame mounted optic, I think there is less of a learning curve to get to where you need to be there. Um, don't get me wrong, there's absolutely a learning curve there, but it's a bigger window. It is it's not moving back and forth with the slide, so it stays stable in space. There are benefits certainly to a frame mounted optic, but the size and things like that, and all of the things that go along with that, holster compatibility and things like that. It's certainly the slide mounted optic is now certainly the way to go, and it's just a little bit more of a learning curve. And recoil management and control and consistency in position, it ends up back where it's supposed to be anyway. But yeah, so there was, it was liberating in that, especially in a fast field course and where shots were required to be, I was an impatient young man. So with irons, sometimes I would rush shots, when you're doing a standard or a qualifier and it's a 25-yard headshot or whatever the deal is. And it's, yeah, sometimes you got to get them out there, that kind of thing. And it didn't always work out. But dots made me slow down because I knew exactly where the projectile was going and I wasn't rushing a sighting solution. So it certainly made me appreciate what I needed and the time I needed, to do certain things with the desired and required degree of precision. And so, and I yeah, I was a big fan of dots from there on, but just it wasn't practical for many years to on a carry gun for whatever reason, size and the whole deal and holster compatibility. But we got there, and now everything that I carry has a dot of some kind on it. So
And, holster manufacturers know everyone's going to be running a dot on their pistol. I say everyone, I'm exaggerating, obviously, but, and, it's the same thing with lighting options too. It used to be if you wanted to mount a rail mounted light, good luck finding a holster unless it was like a law enforcement duty holster.
yeah,
Yeah. So there's a lot of options now, and everybody has a slide cut pistol these days. I mean, you'd be crazy not to.
yep.
And like I said, a lot of the naysayers I think have come around. Where do you think? I know you're not Nostradamus, right? But where do you think, like pistol mounted optics specifically? Where do you think? How else can we improve them? What do you think we could? They're just going to get maybe smaller, but with a bigger window. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to know where we go from here.
Yeah, I think window to housing size is one of those things that'll continue to improve. And whether it's solid crystal deal with the actual window, and we can do that without optical distortion to some extent, or whatever it is. But certainly reducing the halo effect of the housing, right? So that's certainly something there. And I think we're going to continue to improve in battery technology and size. We're going to certainly continue to improve, I think, in dot fidelity and in auto adjust mechanisms and the capability to do that. Or, even if it's like the ideal situation is being to adjust the auto adjust mechanism to some extent. So it's like, I've got an auto adjust and it does this range based on these lux inputs, but I want more at this low lux and more at this high lux, but then I can dial it back if you,
Yep.
you want a more precise dot or things
Can
like
I
that.
simply and intuitively adjust it if I need to, if it's
Yeah.
not sensing what I need it to sense?
Yeah,
That's very
exactly.
cool.
So things like that. And I think, some of the stuff that we were seeing with, and not necessarily on handguns just because of the size, but in rifles, I think we're doing that. We have the rounds remaining technology and things like that. And while I think there's limited applications and utility to the individual shooter, there are real benefits there. That's going to have to cost reduce, I think, at some point to be really viable or desirable from that. But as we look at military applications, that system working to display some of that information in red dots, as well as kind of incorporated into battlefield situational awareness electronics, is where I see the real advantage. Like you get in. So yes, they'll we have that display in optics, whether the red dots are low power variable or use an X4 SCS or integral or to the system or organic to the system, but then on the battlefield, being able to collect and transmit that data back to the jock or the talk, and then these guys are in a tick, and yep, they're yellow on ammo right now, so we're going to send a speedball out to them right now before they're even aware that they need an ammo resupply.
Yeah, that's impressive. And that kind of stuff is very, very futuristic. If I think I'm understanding what you're saying, you're also mentioning that could be a benefit as far as tracking how many rounds you have through a gun over time, like barrel life and things like that.
Yep.
As well as like how many rounds are in your weapon at the time, your firearm at the time, rather. So yeah, no, that's all very, very interesting technology. What is it right now as we start to wind down? What kind of things are you excited about at work right now with Magpul Industries? I know you're not going to, share any secret stuff, but what kind of things are you working on that you're excited about?
Oh man, we have certainly a lot of magazine programs that are in the works for various platforms that are interesting. There's some requests for counter drone technology that we're looking at ways to facilitate in various aspects. Those are very interesting. We've got certain additional furniture that's we've got a lot of stocks, right? But there's still applications and niches and things and voids that we think need filled. The TMAG program has been really interesting and rewarding for us for the applications where translucent does make sense over a window, and that's going to expand. Some of the stuff probably shouldn't talk out of school on that I'm truly excited about. But I mean, we've always got a lot of things in the ways. We've got some drum things coming along the way that are very interesting. But yeah, all that stuff is yeah. I'll stop there, and we've got a lot of things that I'm excited about.
I'm excited to see what's next, man. You guys have been a trendsetter for a long time, and sort of the industry standard when it comes to, accessories for firearms. So yeah, thanks for all that you do, brother. Thanks for coming on the show. Where can people go if they want to find more about Magpul Industries?
Magpul.com, of course, the website, and then we're in various pages on social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, or X. We have Magpul accounts there as well. You can get links to, stay up on what's latest, get your notifications, and then jump over to the website with the full meal deal. And we have some great resources that we've added on that website now. The product line has grown so massive that it's hard to sometimes navigate it. So we have, stock pages that walk you through the entire line of stocks and features, and we have sling pages that do the same thing, and a lot of information there, as well as seeing what we're doing and how we're staying on top of what's going on in the world on the comms page and things like that. So great resource for you if you're trying to figure out what is best for your application, as well as just to kind of take a look around.
Very cool. Thanks a lot, Duane. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciated being here.
Guys, that's a wrap for this episode with Duane Liptak. If this episode resonated with you, be sure and let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Aimpoint's Taking Aim podcast. We'll see you next time.